The arena was alive with excitement. Thousands of alien spectators filled the massive stadium, their glowing eyes fixed on the center. Above them, a giant holographic screen displayed the face of General Zaltor, the undefeated champion of the Zyron battle games. For 10 years, Zaltor had crushed every opponent who dared to challenge him. His massive body, covered in thick silver scales, made him almost impossible to injure. His 4 muscular arms allowed him to attack from multiple directions at once, and his speed, it was unnatural for a warrior of his size. No one had ever lasted more than a minute against him. This year was supposed to be no different. A deep voice echoed across the arena. Today we witness another fool who dares to challenge the great Zaltor. The crowd roared with laughter as the next challenger stepped forward. The laughter turned into pure disbelief. It was a human. The alien audience had seen warriors from across the galaxy, giants from Graver Prime, energy beings from Nebulon 6, and even cyborgs from the Orion cluster. But a human. That was a joke. The human stood calmly, his expression unreadable. He wasn't wearing heavy armor like the others. No advanced weapons, no mechanical enhancements. Just a simple combat suit and a quiet confidence. The announcer smirked. "State your name, challenger." The human raised his head and spoke in a steady voice. "Dane Carter." Some of the aliens in the crowd whispered his name, but most just laughed again. Dane Carter. Never heard of him. This will be over in seconds. Up in the royal viewing box, Emperor Velcor watched the scene with mild amusement. His golden robes shimmered under the lights, his sharp eyes studying the human carefully. Beside him, his 3 daughters, princesses of the Zyron Empire, also watched with curiosity. "He looks weak," the eldest princess muttered. "Then why is he so calm?" the youngest one asked. The emperor didn't answer. He simply leaned forward, waiting for the fight to begin. The challenge begins. The ground trembled as Zaltor stomped toward the center of the arena. He looked down at Dane and grinned, his sharp teeth gleaming. "A human. This is an insult." Zaltor growled. "I will break you in one hit." Dane didn't respond. He simply raised his fists, his stance light but controlled. A loud horn blasted through the arena. The fight had begun. Zaltor moved first. He lunged forward, swinging one of his massive arms toward Dane's head. The force behind the punch was enough to crush a steel wall. The crowd cheered in excitement, expecting to see the human's body smashed into the ground. But then, Dane dodged. It wasn't just a normal dodge. His movement was flawless, almost like he saw the attack coming before it happened. He barely moved an inch, and the giant fist missed him completely. The crowd went silent for a second. Zaltor snarled and attacked again, this time with both right arms. His fists moved like blurs, each strike carrying the power to shatter bones. Again, Dane dodged. And then again. And again. The audience watched in shock. No one had ever dodged Zaltor's attacks so easily. It was as if the human wasn't just reacting to the attacks. He was predicting them. Up in the royal box, the emperor narrowed his eyes. Interesting. Zaltor, now furious, decided to stop playing. He raised all 4 of his arms, muscles tightening. Then, with a deafening roar, he smashed them down toward Dane. The impact shook the entire arena. Dust and debris exploded into the air, covering the battlefield in a thick cloud. The audience exploded into cheers. It's over. That weak human is finished. But then, a shadow moved inside the dust cloud. As the smoke cleared, the crowd saw something that should have been impossible. Dane was still standing. Not just standing. He hadn't even moved from his spot. Zaltor's fists had missed him by mere inches. Dane smirked. "Is that all?" The entire arena went silent. Zaltor's eyes widened in pure rage. No one had ever mocked him like this. He clenched his fists, his entire body shaking. He wasn't just fighting to win anymore. He was fighting to kill. Up in the royal box, The Emperor leaned back in his seat, stroking his chin. The princesses exchanged surprised glances. For the first time in history, Zaltor wasn't playing with his opponent. For the first time in history, a human challenger wasn't losing. And for the first time in history, the champion looked nervous. The air in the arena was electric. No one had expected this, least of all Zaltor. He had crushed thousands of warriors before, some of the strongest in the galaxy. But now, for the first time, he faced an opponent he couldn't hit. Dane stood calmly, his body relaxed, as if he was in control of the entire battle. His heart was steady, his breathing even. Every move Zaltor made was predictable, every attack telegraphed. The alien champion fought with brute strength, but Dane fought with something else. Zaltor's golden eyes burned with fury. This human was making a fool out of him, dodging his attacks with ease, refusing to fight back. It wasn't just a battle anymore. It was humiliation. The audience, once roaring with laughter, now sat in stunned silence. Some of them leaned forward, eyes wide. Others exchanged glances, struggling to understand what they were witnessing. Up in the royal box, the Emperor's lips curled into an amused smile. His daughters were watching closely, especially the youngest. "He's toying with the champion," she whispered. Her sisters scoffed. "That's impossible." The Emperor's eyes glowed with intrigue. Perhaps not. Zaltor let out a deafening roar. He had never needed to use his full strength before, but now, this human was forcing him to change his approach. His muscles bulged, veins glowing with raw energy. He slammed his fists together, creating a shockwave that sent dust flying in every direction. "You think you're special," Zaltor growled. "You think you can mock me." Dane tilted his head slightly. "I don't think," he said. "I know." That was it. Zaltor lunged forward with unimaginable speed. This wasn't just strength anymore. This was rage. This was desperation. His fists cut through the air, each strike powerful enough to shatter stone. But Dane saw everything. He moved before the punches even landed, weaving through the attacks like water. Every movement was precise, controlled, almost effortless. The crowd gasped as Dane slid past a massive strike and delivered a sharp counterblow, just a flick of his wrist against Zaltor's ribs. The impact was small, almost insignificant, but Zaltor's eyes widened in pure shock. Pain. For the first time in years, he felt pain. It was like an electric jolt shooting through his body, radiating from the exact spot where Dane had struck. It wasn't powerful, it wasn't brutal, but it was perfectly placed. Dane stepped back, barely breathing hard. "Now we see what happens when I hit back." Zaltor staggered for a moment before regaining his balance. He ignored the pain, convincing himself it was nothing. But deep inside, something else crept in. Something he had never felt before. Fear. The audience didn't know what to think. Some of them were still in shock. Others refused to believe their eyes. The human. Hurting Zaltor. Impossible. The Emperor leaned forward. "This is getting interesting." His daughters didn't respond. They were too focused on the fight. Their eyes locked on Dane. There was something about him. Something different. Zaltor's rage turned cold. He knew he had been careless. He had underestimated this human, assuming he was weak. But now he saw the truth. Dane Carter was not weak. And if Zaltor didn't change his strategy, he was going to lose. Zaltor took a deep breath and raised his arms. The glowing veins across his body pulsed brighter, his muscles flexing as he activated his battle mode. His species had a special ability. When pushed to their limits, their bodies became stronger, faster, almost unstoppable. The air around Zaltor crackled with energy. His form seemed to blur, becoming faster, sharper, deadlier. The arena lights flickered from the sheer pressure of his power. Dane watched, his expression unreadable. "You were lucky before," Zaltor said, his voice deeper now. "But luck won't save you anymore." In a blink, he vanished. The audience barely had time to process what had happened. 1 second. Zaltor was there. Then he was gone. Dane's eyes flicked to the side. Here he comes. Zaltor reappeared behind him, fist raised, ready to strike with a force greater than ever before. The air screamed from the speed of his attack. There was no time to dodge. For the first time, Dane didn't move. The punch connected. A sound like thunder echoed through the stadium. The impact sent a shockwave through the ground, cracks spreading across the arena floor. The audience gasped in horror. Zaltor grinned, his fist still buried in Dane's chest. Finally, he landed a hit. But something was wrong. Dane was still standing. The grin faded from Zaltor's face. He pulled his hand back, only to see Dane staring right at him, completely unfazed. No pain, no damage, nothing. Dane exhaled slowly. My turn. Before Zaltor could react, Dane's hand shot forward, fast as lightning. He struck one point on Zaltor's chest. A single hit. The alien champion's entire body seized up. His glowing veins flickered. His breathing stopped for a second. Zaltor took a shaky step backward. His legs felt heavy. His arms refused to move properly. His entire body was shutting down. Panic set in. What? What did you do? Dane simply watched. Pressure points. Your body is powerful, but everything has weaknesses. I just found yours. The realization hit Zaltor like a hammer. This wasn't just a human fighter. This was someone who studied his opponents, someone who knew exactly where to hit, how to break them down piece by piece, someone who had planned this from the start. The audience was dead silent. The Emperor, for the first time in his life, looked genuinely intrigued. His youngest daughter whispered, "He's going to win." The Emperor said nothing, but deep down, he agreed. Dane took a step forward. This fight isn't over yet, but for the first time, you're not the one in control. Zaltor clenched his teeth. His body was betraying him, his strength useless against this human's technique. For the first time in history, the undefeated champion was losing. The arena was no longer filled with cheers or laughter. The crowd, composed of countless alien species from across the galaxy, sat in stunned silence. No one had ever seen anything like this. Zaltor, the undefeated champion of the Emperor's Grand Tournament, the strongest warrior of his species, was struggling. And not just struggling, he was losing. Dane stood tall, his body relaxed, his breathing steady. He had barely broken a sweat, while Zaltor's body was covered in deep red bruises. The once mighty alien was gasping for air, his muscles twitching from the aftershock of Dane's precise strikes. Yet Zaltor refused to fall. With a guttural growl, he forced his body to move. His pride, his reputation, everything was on the line. He could not allow a mere human to defeat him. The Emperor leaned forward on his throne, his sharp eyes gleaming with interest. He had watched countless battles, but never before had he witnessed such a shift in power. He could feel it in the air. Something historic was happening. The Emperor's daughter sat beside him, watching closely. The youngest one, Sarah, couldn't tear her gaze away from Dane. Her sisters still looked skeptical, but she knew the truth. This human was different. Zaltor let out a deep breath and steadied his stance. He had one last chance. If he couldn't win with brute strength, then he would have to outthink his opponent. "Human," he growled, his voice hoarse. "I underestimated you." Dane didn't reply. His expression remained calm, unreadable. "I will not make that mistake again," Zaltor said. Then, in an instant, he vanished. The crowd barely had time to react. One moment, Zaltor was there, and the next, he was gone, moving faster than the eye could follow. He wasn't just using his strength anymore. He was using strategy. Dane didn't move. He stood still, his eyes scanning the space around him. He could hear the faintest shifts in the air, the almost imperceptible sound of Zaltor's movement. And then, a flicker. Dane twisted his body just in time, narrowly dodging the deadliest strike yet. Zaltor's fist grazed his shoulder, missing him by a fraction of an inch. The alien reappeared, his eyes wide. He had been sure that strike would land. Dane smiled slightly. Better, but not enough. Zaltor snarled. He disappeared again, moving at impossible speeds, attacking from multiple angles. The crowd watched in awe as the two fighters blurred across the arena, exchanging blows so fast that only the most skilled warriors could track them. And yet, Dane never faltered. He dodged. He countered. He stayed 2 steps ahead, predicting every movement before it even happened. It was as if he could see the future. The Emperor's oldest daughter, Vena, frowned. "Father, how is this possible? Zaltor should be faster." The Emperor tapped his chin thoughtfully. "Speed means nothing if you are predictable." Vena scoffed. "But a human? Outsmarting a champion." Zira, the youngest, finally spoke. "He's not just fighting. He's studying him." The Emperor glanced at his daughter, intrigued by her observation. Indeed, Dane wasn't just dodging. He was analyzing. Every attack, every shift in Zaltor's stance, every movement of his muscles, it was all being stored in his mind. Every second of the fight made him stronger. Zaltor roared in frustration. His speed, his strength, his energy, none of it was working. He threw a massive punch, but at the last moment, Dane sidestepped effortlessly. Then came the counterattack. Dane's hand shot forward, striking a single point on Zaltor's shoulder. A sharp pain exploded through the alien's arm. His muscles locked up. The champion's eyes widened in horror. He couldn't move his arm. Dane took a step back, watching his opponent struggle. His voice was calm, almost conversational. "That's 2. Zaltor snarled, forcing his body back into motion. He lunged again, but Dane slipped under the attack and delivered another perfectly placed strike. This time, Zaltor's right leg buckled. He stumbled, barely managing to stay on his feet. Dane tilted his head. 3. The audience collectively held their breath. The impossible was happening before their very eyes. Zaltor tried to force himself to keep fighting, but his body was betraying him. Every nerve, every muscle was screaming in pain. Dane wasn't just attacking him. He was dismantling him piece by piece. The realization hit the alien champion like a thunderbolt. He was losing. Not just losing, being completely outclassed. The Emperor watched with a calculating gaze. This was no ordinary human. Zira leaned forward, barely able to contain her excitement. She had never seen someone fight like this. She could feel her heart pounding as she whispered, "He's going to win." Her father didn't answer, but she could see it in his expression. He was thinking the same thing. Zaltor gasped for air, his legs trembling. He had never felt such exhaustion before. He had fought countless warriors, faced death itself, but never had he felt this kind of pressure. Dane raised his fists, calm and composed. He took a slow step forward. "You're strong," Dane admitted, "but strength alone isn't enough." Zaltor's fists clenched. He had never known fear before. But now, staring into Dane's unreadable eyes, he felt it deep in his bones. For the first time in his life, he knew what it meant to be powerless. Zaltor's body swayed, his breath ragged. His mind screamed at him to fight, to resist, to push forward with everything he had left. But his body, his once powerful, unstoppable body, was failing him. Dane took slow, measured steps toward him. He didn't rush. He didn't need to. He had already won. The crowd had gone completely silent, as if the entire universe had paused to witness this moment. Thousands of alien eyes stared in disbelief. The great champion, the warrior who had never tasted defeat, now stood on trembling legs, facing a human who had barely broken a sweat. Zaltor growled, summoning every ounce of his remaining strength. He refused to fall. He could not fall. With a desperate cry, he launched himself forward, swinging with all the force his body could muster. It was a final gamble, a last-ditch effort. But Dane was already moving. Effortlessly, he sidestepped, his movements as smooth as flowing water. Zaltor's massive fist sliced through empty air. The alien stumbled, his balance momentarily lost. And that was all the opening Dane needed. With a sharp strike to the ribs, he sent Zaltor sprawling to the ground. Dust and blood stained the arena floor as the mighty warrior collapsed, unable to rise. A single moment of silence followed. Then the roar of the crowd erupted. It wasn't just excitement, it was shock, disbelief, awe. The arena had never seen anything like this before. A human had not only fought the galaxy's strongest warrior, he had defeated him. The Emperor remained seated, his expression unreadable. His daughters, however, were far from silent. Vena's mouth was slightly open in shock, her analytical mind racing to process what she had just witnessed. The second daughter, Myra, narrowed her eyes, as if trying to see through the human before her. Zira, the youngest, smiled. She had known it from the start. Dane was no ordinary warrior. The Emperor finally stood, raising his hand. The noise in the arena immediately ceased. The Emperor's deep voice rang across the arena. The match is over. Zaltor, still lying on the ground, gritted his teeth in frustration. He had never known this kind of humiliation. His entire reputation had been shattered in front of thousands. Dane simply exhaled, his muscles still relaxed. He had expected this outcome from the start. The Emperor's gaze settled on him. You have proven yourself beyond expectation, human. Dane met his eyes, standing firm, unfazed by the presence of one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy. The champion's prize is yours. The crowd murmured in anticipation. This was the moment. As per the rules of the tournament, the winner would receive a great reward, a prize chosen by the Emperor himself. But no one, not even Dane, could have predicted what came next. The Emperor slowly gestured toward the platform behind him. The audience gasped as three figures stepped forward. The Emperor's three daughters. Vena, the eldest, remained stoic, her sharp eyes studying Dane like a puzzle waiting to be solved. Myra, the second, looked less than pleased, her arms crossed in frustration. Zira, the youngest, still had that small, knowing smile. The Emperor's voice was absolute. By our traditions, the victor of this battle is granted a reward of great honor. And so, human, he extended his hand toward his daughters. You will choose one of my daughters as your bride. A stunned silence fell over the arena. Dane's brows lifted slightly. Of all the things he had expected, this was not one of them. The crowd erupted into a frenzy of whispers. This was unprecedented. Never before had an outsider, let alone a human, been granted such an honor. Dane remained silent, his mind processing the situation. The Emperor continued, his voice firm. Or, if you refuse, you may take the wealth of the royal treasury instead. But know this, choosing wealth will mark you as a warrior who fears power, one unworthy of true honor. It was a test. Dane could see it in the Emperor's gaze. This wasn't just about a prize. It was about something greater. His decision would determine his place in this empire. Vena watched him carefully. Would he choose duty? Myra narrowed her eyes. Would he be foolish enough to refuse? Zira, however, seemed excited. She was the only one who truly wanted to see what he would do. Dane finally spoke, his voice calm and steady. I understand the weight of this choice. He looked at the Emperor. But tell me, if I refuse both, do I still keep my victory? The crowd gasped. The Emperor's eyes glowed with intrigue. He had not expected that question. Xira's smile widened. This human was interesting. The Emperor chuckled, his deep voice echoing across the arena. You seek freedom above all else. Dane gave a slight nod. I fought for my own reasons, not for wealth, and not for power. The Emperor stared at him for a long moment. The tension in the air was almost unbearable. Then, to everyone's shock. He laughed. A genuine, deep laugh. The kind of laughter that shook the walls of the Grand Colosseum. The Emperor's gaze sharpened. "You are an intriguing man, Dane." Then his expression became serious again. "Very well. But understand this, whether you accept my daughters or not, your victory has changed everything." Dane remained silent, listening. "You have shattered the pride of our greatest warrior. You have proven yourself to be a force unlike any other. From this day forward, your name will be known throughout the Empire." The Emperor's eyes gleamed. "And not everyone will celebrate your success." A cold wind passed through the arena. Dane could feel it. The weight of his actions, the unseen eyes that now watched him, the unseen threats that had just awakened. This was not the end of his fight. It was only the beginning. The air in the Grand Colosseum felt heavy, charged with tension. Even though the battle had ended, the echoes of Dane's victory still lingered. The crowd had cheered, whispered, and gasped at his unexpected response to the Emperor's offer. But now, the real challenge began. Dane stood tall in the arena, watching the Emperor's calculating gaze. The laughter had faded, replaced with an expression of subtle amusement, mixed with something deeper. "You are either a fool or a man with an unshakable will," the Emperor finally said. "To refuse power, wealth, and even a royal bond. Do you truly understand the weight of your decision?" Dane met his gaze without hesitation. "I understand it completely." The Emperor leaned back in his throne, studying him. Then he turned his attention to his daughters. Vena's expression was unreadable, her sharp mind clearly working through new strategies. Myra looked annoyed, as if she had been insulted by the rejection, despite not wanting to be a prize in the first place. Zira, however, grinned. The youngest princess had found Dane fascinating from the very start. And now, she was curious. The Emperor finally sighed. "Very well, human, you have earned your freedom." But then his gaze darkened. "However, that freedom may not last as long as you hope." A ripple of uncertainty moved through the crowd. Even Dane felt a shift in the atmosphere. The Emperor slowly rose from his throne. His voice, though calm, carried an unspoken warning. "By defeating Xaltor, you have shattered more than just a record." Dane narrowed his eyes slightly, waiting for him to continue. "You have humiliated one of the most powerful factions in this empire." Xaltor was not just a champion. He was a warrior favored by the High Lords of the Orion Syndicate. At the mention of the Orion Syndicate, whispers erupted among the spectators. Even those who had cheered for Dane's victory now exchanged worried glances. Dane had heard the name before. The Orion Syndicate was a powerful, shadowy alliance that controlled vast territories beyond the Emperor's reach. Their warriors were feared, their influence stretching into every corner of the empire, and Xaltor had been one of their most prized fighters. The Emperor's voice dropped lower, but it carried through the arena with absolute authority. "They will not take this loss lightly." Dane's jaw tightened. He had expected consequences, but now it was clear. His victory had stirred something far bigger than a simple tournament. Vena finally spoke, stepping forward. "Father is right," she said, her voice cool and measured. "The Syndicate does not forgive humiliation. They will retaliate, and they will start with you." Dane didn't flinch. Instead, he tilted his head slightly. "Good," he said simply. Vena's eyebrows lifted just a fraction. "You welcome their wrath. I welcome a fight." Silence. Then, to everyone's shock, Sira laughed. It wasn't mocking or cruel. It was genuine amusement. "I knew it," she said, stepping closer. "You're not just strong. You're fearless." Dane didn't respond. He simply waited. The Emperor observed him for a moment longer before making his decision. "I will not stop them from coming for you," he said. "But neither will I allow them to disrupt my empire unchecked." He turned toward his royal guards. "Prepare a ship for the human." Dane's eyes sharpened. He had expected imprisonment or an immediate challenge, but an escort off the planet. That was unexpected. The Emperor continued. You will leave this world. You may go wherever you choose. But know this, your name will spread. You will not be able to hide. The moment you step beyond these walls, you will be marked as a target. The crowd murmured again. Some pitied him. Others envied him. Few understood that what awaited him outside was far more dangerous than any battle in the arena. Dane took a deep breath, then smirked. Then I'd better get started. The Emperor gave a small nod before turning to his daughters one last time. If any of you wish to accompany him, speak now. A sharp silence followed. Vena crossed her arms. I will remain here. My duty is to the Empire. Myra scoffed. You think I'd lower myself to follow a reckless human? Hard pass. But then, I'll go, Xira said casually. All eyes snapped to her. Even Dane raised an eyebrow. Vena stared at her younger sister. You can't be serious. Oh, I'm very serious, Xira said, stepping forward without hesitation. This is the first interesting thing to happen in a long time. The Emperor gave her a long, unreadable look. You understand the risks. I do, she said. You understand that once you leave, your position in the royal court will never be the same. Xira simply smiled. I was never meant for politics, father. You knew that. The Emperor remained silent for a moment. Then, with a nod, he gestured toward Dane. Then go, and may fate decide what becomes of you. Dane exhaled slowly, then turned toward the exit. The entire Colosseum watched as he walked away, not as a champion, not as a slave, but as a free warrior stepping into the unknown. Xira followed without hesitation, grinning like she had just won a prize of her own. What awaited them beyond this planet? Neither of them knew. But one thing was certain. This was only the beginning. The massive Imperial spaceport hummed with energy. Towering ships lined the docking stations, their metallic hulls gleaming under the artificial lights. The scent of fuel and burning plasma filled the air as engineers rushed to prepare vessels for departure. Dane stepped onto the loading platform, his boots clicking against the metal floor. Beside him, Xira walked with an effortless grace, her piercing blue eyes scanning their surroundings with curiosity rather than concern. The moment they entered the main corridor, all eyes turned to them. Dane had expected it. Word of his victory had spread like wildfire. And now he was more than just a warrior. He was a legend in the making. But legends also attracted danger. As they approached their assigned ship, a sleek black vessel designed for speed and agility, Xira smirked. So, any idea where we're going? Dane glanced at her. You followed me without a plan. She shrugged. I like surprises. Before he could respond, a low, distorted voice interrupted them. You won't make it off this planet alive, human. Dane tensed. He turned slowly, eyes locking onto a shadowy figure standing just beyond the loading bay. The figure stepped forward, revealing himself. He was tall, draped in dark combat armor with glowing red accents. His reptilian features were unmistakable, a Venkai assassin. Xira let out an amused breath. They didn't waste any time, did they? The Venkai tilted his head. The Orion Syndicate does not tolerate humiliation. You have made powerful enemies. Dane's expression remained calm. And they send just one of you. The assassin's eyes flickered with cold amusement. I am not here to fight you, human. Not yet. Xira raised an eyebrow. Then what do you want? The assassin took a slow step forward. A warning. The Syndicate has placed a bounty on your head. Every mercenary, hunter, and killer across the system will be coming for you. Dane crossed his arms. That all? The assassin's gaze darkened. That depends on your next move. There was something off about him. He wasn't just a messenger. Dane could feel it. Every warrior had an aura, an energy that spoke of their intent. And this assassin, he wasn't just delivering a message. He was studying him, testing him. Dane took a step forward, closing the space between them. Tell your masters I'm not running." The assassin didn't flinch. "Then you will die." Dane smirked. "Maybe." A long silence stretched between them before the assassin finally turned. Without another word, he disappeared into the shadows of the docking bay. Zira let out a slow whistle. Well, that was dramatic. Dane exhaled. He wasn't afraid of mercenaries, but this was different. The Orion Syndicate wasn't just powerful. They were relentless. They didn't send warnings unless they were preparing something much worse. And yet, he felt a thrill. This was exactly what he had been waiting for. Without hesitation, he boarded the ship. Zira followed, still grinning. "So, where to, fearless leader?" Dane glanced at the controls. "Somewhere we can prepare." She raised an eyebrow. "And where would that be?" He activated the ship's engines, feeling the raw power vibrate beneath his fingertips. "A place that welcomes warriors." As the ship lifted off, leaving the Imperial world behind, neither of them knew that their greatest battle was still to come. The stars stretched endlessly before them as the sleek ship cut through space like a silent predator. The hum of the engines was steady, a rhythmic pulse that filled the cockpit. Dane sat at the controls, his fingers hovering over the navigation system as Sira leaned back in her seat, watching him with an amused expression. "You still haven't told me where we're going," she said. Dane smirked. "Because you'd argue with me about it." Zira raised an eyebrow. "Oh, try me." He entered the final coordinates and hit the thrusters. The ship lurched forward, engaging the jump drive. The space around them warped and stretched, pulling them toward their destination. "We're going to Ragnus Prime," he finally said. Zira's relaxed posture vanished. She sat up straight, eyes narrowing. "You're joking." Dane glanced at her. "Do I look like I'm joking?" "Dane," she said, her voice edged with disbelief, "that planet is a war zone. The last time I was there, half the surface was burning. That's why we need to go." Zira shook her head. "No, absolutely not. You just defeated one of the strongest warriors in the galaxy, and now you want to march into the middle of another fight." Dane's jaw tightened. "This isn't just about me anymore." She studied him for a moment before exhaling. "All right, I'll bite. What's on Ragnus Prime?" "A war council," he said. Zira's expression turned from disbelief to curiosity. "A war council?" Dane nodded. "Not just any council. This one is made up of the deadliest warriors in the quadrant. Mercenaries, exiled commanders, rogue elites, they all gather there to prepare for something big. And you think they'll help us?" Dane met her gaze. "I think they'll listen." Zira let out a low laugh. "You're insane." "Maybe." The ship's alarms suddenly blared. "Incoming hostiles." Dane's head snapped toward the scanner. 3 red blips were closing in fast. "Looks like the Orion Syndicate didn't wait long," Shira muttered. She jumped into action, bringing the ship's defenses online. "They must have tracked us the moment we left the station." Dane gritted his teeth. "Then let's make sure they regret it." The comms crackled to life. A voice, low and distorted, came through. "Human, you should have stayed in the shadows." Dane pressed a button, responding in a calm tone. "You should have brought more ships." A cruel chuckle echoed through the speakers. "Oh, we did." Before he could react, 2 more blips appeared on the scanner. Zira's hands flew over the controls. 5 enemy ships? That's excessive. Dane's eyes locked onto the approaching vessels. "No, that's fear." The lead enemy ship fired first. A plasma bolt cut through space, barely missing their hull. Dane jerked the controls, twisting the ship into a rapid evasive maneuver. Zira activated the rear cannons. "We're outnumbered, Dane." "We've been in worse situations," he replied. The enemy ships closed in, flanking them from both sides. The ship's defense systems beeped wildly as target locks engage. They were surrounded. Zira cursed. "We need a plan." Dane's mind raced. He could fight, but he needed to make it to Ragnus Prime. This wasn't about winning a single battle. This was about preparing for the war ahead. He made a decision. Hold on. He slammed the throttle forward, pushing the ship to its maximum speed. The enemy vessels fired wildly as he twisted through the chaos, dodging their attacks by inches. Xira's eyes widened. You're heading straight for the asteroid field. Exactly. The rocky expanse loomed ahead, a twisting maze of jagged stone and debris. Dane's fingers tightened on the controls. This is insane, Xira muttered. Dane grinned. You said that already. As they plunged into the asteroid field, the enemy ships followed. Now it was a test of skill. Dane weaved through the massive rocks, using the terrain as cover. Plasma bolts exploded against the asteroids, sending shards flying in every direction. Xira took aim and fired. One of the Syndicate's ships clipped an asteroid, spinning out of control before crashing into another. 4 left, she said. Dane twisted the ship sideways, squeezing through a narrow gap. 2 more enemies tried to follow. 1 didn't make it. The explosion sent debris spiraling, colliding with another ship and taking it out in a chain reaction. 2 left. The remaining ships hesitated. They knew the risk now. Dane saw his opening. He accelerated toward the densest part of the field. Then, at the last second, he cut the engines. The ship drifted, silent and invisible against the floating rocks. The enemy pilots had no time to react. They shot past them at full speed, right into a cluster of asteroids. 1 was instantly crushed. The last ship barely managed to pull up, but before it could turn, Xira locked onto it and fired. The final explosion lit up the asteroid field. Silence followed. Xira exhaled, shaking her head. That was ridiculous. Dane re-engaged the engines, but it worked. As they emerged from the asteroid field, Ragnus Prime came into view. The war-torn planet burned with distant fires, its skies filled with the echoes of ongoing battles. Xira stared at it. Are you sure about this? Dane's gaze hardened. This is just the beginning. Their fight wasn't over. It was only getting started.